Hey, we're back. Today we're going to talk about agency in this section. We say a lot that real estate is a relationship business, and in real estate you have to be aware constantly of what relationships you are in at the moment. So think about this for a second as we get into this chapter. In different relationships in your everyday life, what is your role? When I'm with my mom, I'm a daughter. When I'm with my husband, I'm a wife. When I'm with my daughter, I'm a mother. So we have different roles we play in different relationships. And sometimes, especially for testing purposes, it can get really confusing whenever you read the question if you forget what role you're playing. So there are some key players and some key terms. And in the very beginning, we said that you're going to have to tweak your mentality a little bit. Forget the common uses of some words that we use in everyday language like agent or agency or even broker, and remember what law says those words actually mean. So as we get into agency, let's talk about some of the key relationships and some of the key roles that people are going to play. One of the words that you're going to see in this chapter, and it's a big one, is principle. Principle. Anytime you see principle, you should be able to fill in the blanks in whatever question you're thinking about. Instead of principle, I want you to fill in decision maker. In any role where you're talking about a principle, the principal is going to be the decision maker in that role. Just like my mom is the decision maker, even at 40-something years old, my mother is still the decision maker in any of those relationships. So in your questions, whenever you see principal, remember that is the person who is the decision maker. So another role that we're going to see is agent. Anytime you see agent, I want you to remember that an agent is always someone who is working on someone else's behalf. An agent is working on someone else's behalf, and it's going to make sense in a second whenever we talk about the interaction of these two relationships. So your principal is always a decision maker, the agent's always working on someone else's behalf. So in common terminology, we think the agent's always your real estate agent, right? My agent. Well, technically, your agent is anyone who's working on your behalf at that moment. So remember we talked about the different roles? As an agent, who could work as an agent? Who would be in a capacity to work on someone else's behalf? Sometimes the agent might be the broker. All of our relationships stem from the broker. The broker is the person who has the relationships with the client. The broker is the person with the contract to represent your sellers. The broker is the person with the contract to represent the buyers. And we've learned about that also in other chapters. So an agent could be the broker. If I'm in a relationship where the broker is working on a seller's behalf, then the broker could be referred to as an agent. You can also see agent refer to licensees, because you now are a candidate for real estate licensure. Once you're working as a real estate agent, you'll be considered a licensee. Not always necessarily an agent, but legally you're referred to as a licensee. And remember, as a licensee, you're always working on someone else's behalf. So on most times, you're working on your broker's behalf as a representative of your broker and working on behalf still of their clients. And it's going to make sense as you get into the chapter, so hang on with me for a little bit longer. So the agent could be the broker, the agent could be the licensees, the agents could also be what we call an AIF that you're going to learn about, attorney in fact, whenever you're working as a power of attorney for someone else. So just remember, anytime you see agent, you should always be able to replace that with the person working on someone else's behalf. And that's going to help you know, are you a brother, are you a sister, are you a mom? What are you doing in this role? Because for question purposes, if you don't know who the players are, you're not going to get the answers right, and you're not going to understand where they're coming from. So principal, the decision maker. Now that we've talked about an agent's working on someone else's behalf, whose behalf are they working on? Well, Well, the principal is a primary decision maker in that relationship. Who can be the principal? If you're in a relationship where I'm saying I am a real estate licensee, I'm going out on a listing appointment to get a listing, I would be an agent working on behalf of my principal. Who is my principal now? Now my principal is my broker. So depending on the relationship I'm in at the moment, principal could refer to a broker, the person in charge of the company, right? Principal usually is referring to the main decision maker in a transaction, or they'll even say the principal in the transaction, which means that would be the buyer or seller. Remember one thing too, and if I write it, make sure you're going to remember what I say about it. The principal sometimes could be the agent or licensee, but only if they are also the buyer or seller. Does that make sense? I hate to tell you, but once you're a licensee, you're always going to be working on someone else's behalf. The broker, one broker responsible for each company, is a primary decision maker, but the agents are always working on behalf of your broker and working on behalf of the client. So the only time you'll ever see an actual licensee referred to as a principal is if that licensee is the buyer or seller or landlord or tenant in the transaction. Because remember, by definition, the principal is the primary decision maker. They're the ones that hold all the power in that relationship. But typically, licensees are always working on someone else's behalf. So are you seeing the interplay of the terminology? All right, so let's get rid of this one. The next one we're going to talk about, primary relationships, are the actual broker. Broker's easy. Because for a broker, there is one broker in charge for each company. The broker is always going to refer to that one person for each brokerage that the real estate commission deems in control of the running of that company, and that's going to be the broker. So whenever you hear broker in common terminology, they call all real estate agents brokers. Oh, this is my real estate broker. But legally and by your terminology, there's only one broker for each company who is the broker in charge of making decisions on behalf of the entire company, the one person with all the liability. So you're always going to refer to technically broker as that one person in charge of the company. And remember, all the other agents work on their behalf, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So next, another term, and we had it on the board already, is licensee. Licensee. So who can be a licensee? The licensee is someone licensed by the Real Estate Commission to do business as a real estate licensee. Pretty easy, right? So the licensee could refer to the broker, could also refer to the agents or licensees under the broker, or it could also refer to someone who holds a community association manager's license because they are also licensees. But a licensee is always going to be that person licensed by the Real Estate Commission to conduct business and real estate transactions whenever you see that come up. So your broker, your licensees as agents, and also your broker associates or associate brokers, who is someone who has earned the same qualification of a broker, but they work under the broker in charge. And again, once you read through all the material, the terms are going to make a whole lot more sense. But I just want you to know, sometimes it gets confusing because, again, you have to remember what role you're playing in. I may be a principal if I'm buying my own house, and the question could refer to me that way. But if I'm working on behalf of my broker, I'm going to be an agent, someone working on their behalf. So just make sure that you're aware of what relationship you're in at the time. So if we're talking about relationships, let's move on a little bit. You're going to see a few other terms about creating agency relationships. We can work with the public as customers, or we can work with the public as clients. And there's a big difference between customer levels of service and client levels of service. We owe customers certain obligations. We owe clients much higher level of loyalty and trust, and we give them a whole lot more information. And again, you'll read the definite differences. Make sure you know the difference between customer and client, because the levels of service are different, and it's, of course, everything in our business revolves around the relationships we have with clients and customers. Fiduciary, it's a cool word, nobody knows how to pronounce it, so there you go, fiduciary. You'll see fiduciary duties in your terminology. Easy way to remember fiduciary, it's a relationship of trust or loyalty. I consider my husband to have a fiduciary relationship with me. So anytime you're in a relationship with someone, no matter what role they're playing, that should be a relationship of trust and loyalty to you, we consider that a fiduciary relationship. And your chapter is also going to break down in much more detail the different duties, fiduciary duties you would have to all of the different players in that game. If you're an agent, what are your fiduciary duties to your broker? If you're an agent working for a client, your buyer or seller working for your principal, then what are your fiduciary duties to those other players in the role? And the chapter also is going to give you much more detail about what your levels of service are for buyers and for sellers. So I think you'll enjoy that whenever you get in there. So now let's talk about a couple of different types of agencies. Remember, agency is working on behalf of someone else. We also said that there's a difference between customer and client levels of service. So customer service, we can give to anyone. Client levels of service, we have to have a contract. We have to have an agreement to work specifically on their behalf. And those are laid out in the form of buyer brokerage agreements and also in the form of seller listing agreements. There's different types of agency relationships. Let's talk about that for a second, because it can also get slightly confusing. We already said, and we've learned in previous chapters, that in a real estate brokerage relationship, everyone represents the broker, right? Or everyone is represented by the broker. So you'll have an independent contractor agreement to work directly as the hands and feet of your broker, but in that relationship, your broker is the decision maker. Under every broker and around every broker are all of the different agents or licensees, but all the different agents, for now we'll just call them agents, we know that's what we commonly call them, but all the different real estate agents work on behalf of the broker. And if you consider it this way, the broker is like an umbrella of protection. Forgive my artwork, but hopefully it'll prove a point. An umbrella of protection over all the agents. You learned already in the breakdown of license law that the broker protects, and the broker has a liability for all the actions of the company. So remember, we said that the broker directly represents sellers and buyers, and the agents work on his behalf, right? So if I was going to go into the courtroom, maybe I was going to get a divorce. Not, but maybe I'm going to get a divorce. The last person in the world I want to call for advice is my soon-to-be ex-husband's divorce attorney, right? So would I, as a buyer, want to go directly to the listing agent for advice or to represent my best interest in that transaction? No. We call that in real estate dual agency. It can happen, it's okay. License law says you have to have legal written permission from buyer and seller to do dual agency, and it's a really important concept. But since everybody represents the broker, imagine this. We have an agent working directly with the buyer, and then in the same brokerage, we have an agent working directly for the seller. Technically, that would be called dual agency. Buyer and seller in the same transaction represented by the same broker. You're going to learn that there's something called designated agency, which is another important concept that you want to make sure you hold on to. And that's where that broker can actually remove that one agent that's working with the buyer and remove that one agent working directly for the seller and assign them responsibilities separate from all of the other responsibilities in in the brokerage, because remember, every buyer, every seller represented by the broker is also represented by every agent. You with me so far? But designated agency is where the broker is going to say, I'm designating this agent, this licensee, to work directly with the buyer, designating this agent to work directly with the seller, and you no longer have to protect the other party's best interest. Got it? So you're going to learn about dual agency, which is one broker, one agent, both representing buyer and seller. One agent representing buyer and seller, dual agency. Then designated agency, broker with two different agents separately representing buyer and seller. It's kind of complicated when you just read it in terminology, but I want to make sure that you understand that one because it's a biggie. We're also going to talk in this chapter about disclosures that are necessary. We've touched on a couple, but the disclosures that are necessary to make whenever we get into these agency relationships. So this is the relationship chapter. Enjoy learning about the relationships you're going to encounter as you dive deeper into your real estate studies, and know this is an important one. It's a biggie for state content on the state exam also, but in the future, whenever you get into your real estate career, you always have to be aware of what relationship you're in at the moment and how those interplay. So enjoy this chapter.